Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Na'madhu nasalli ala Rasulil Kareem. Viewers, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. In the previous video, there was a discussion about the importance of prayer or the importance of Salat. And it was mentioned that prayer is not the same thing as Salat. Prayer could be translated as supplication or dua, which can be made in any language, and there's no requirement of being in a state of ablution or state of wudu, which is necessary for salat. So, as was mentioned last time, the salat has to be with the proper method, as was taught by Rasulullah SAW, and it has to be in the Arabic language, and all the motions which were prescribed, they have to be performed facing the Qibla. So Muslims, wherever they live, any part of the world, they have to be facing the Qibla. For the men, the congregational prayer in the masjid, carries more reward. And for the women, the prayer in the house carries the more reward. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made it easy for women because of their responsibilities in the house, especially with the children. So the woman who prays in the house gets the same reward as the man gets in the masjid. So it's important to know that prayer is the foremost duty, the first thing to be accounted for on the Day of Judgment. And it is said in the hadith that if the prayer is in order, then all the other deeds will be accepted. According to hadith of Rasulullah, prayer 5 times a day is like washing yourself in a stream 5 times a day. And he asked Sahaba something to the effect, would there be any dirt left on that person? And they said no. He said, that is the way with Salat. So any sin, and the ulama say this is reference to the major sins, any minor sins that are committed from Fajr to Zohar are forgiven by the Salat, and any sins committed after Zohar, before Asr, are washed away by Asr, and so on. So in other words, it is said according to the hadith of Rasulullah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has promised to forgive any person who performs Salat 5 times a day in the proper way, in the prescribed way. And Allah has given no promise with regards to a person who does not pray 5 times a day. Allah may forgive him or take him to task. So it is important to emphasize that Salat is a right of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the creation. It is a way of expressing one's humility. It's a way of expressing one's gratitude to Allah for all the blessings. And this will be cause of regret for those who did not perform Salat. So Allah has mentioned this particular act so many times in the Quran, dozens of times. No other deed has been mentioned so much as Salat in the Quran. And unfortunately, many Muslims are ignorant of that. They consider this to be a ritual which is not very important. And this is a deception from the shaitan. Something which is so valuable, so important, is considered unimportant. And that's because of the lack of knowledge, lack of effort on the part of people. Generally, on Friday khutbahs, there's not much talk about the importance of Salat. The public, most of them come just one time to the masjid in the whole week, and they don't hear much talk about the importance of Salat. And this is one of the drawbacks, or this is one of um, uh, failings of the imams and the people responsible in the masajids, that they do not emphasize this particular deed enough. And Rasulullah has mentioned the importance of Salat so many times, and it was unthinkable for his companions, the Sahaba, to not perform Salat at the prescribed time. So, in order to do that, of course, one has to learn the rules and try and do it the way it should be done. And of course, the more one does it, the more spiritual development one gets. So, this is a way of getting spiritual development because it is it connects a person with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala 5 times a day. And that connection is necessary for all creation, for all mankind. There is no better way of getting connected with Allah. It is said that if one wants to talk to Allah, one should resort to Salat. And if one wants to one wants to listen to Allah, then one should recite the Quran. Because the Quran is talking, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking to the person who is reciting the Quran. So this is the speech of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the person who is reciting is actually listening to that. So these amal on a daily basis are very important for the spiritual development of a human being. And it has to be stressed. This is the education that Rasulullah brought. This is the education that was essential for all mankind. And when the Sahaba got this education, they were able to do things that nobody else could do. And over a period of time, the importance that was attached by the early Muslims was not emphasized, and the result was disaster for the Ummah. Majority people today do not offer this most essential part of our lives. This is the most important duty that a person has in a day. We consider our jobs to be important, consider our businesses to be important. People who are running the government, politicians, they think they're doing very important things, but they fail to understand that everything is in the control of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If Allah is not pleased, then no matter what anybody does, they will not be able to accomplish. So today the Muslims are trying to accomplish things without obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The act of leaving Salat is an act of leaving Islam. There's said in a hadith something to the effect that Salat is the dividing line between Iman and Kufr. So a person who is not performing Salat 5 times a day, he is actually at that particular time outside the fold of Islam. So no matter how many good deeds he may be doing otherwise, that giving up of Salat will outweigh all the good deeds that he is doing. So importance of Salat has to be stressed upon the children, and one has to make effort on a daily basis to educate people. In the schools and colleges, in the Muslim countries, not enough emphasis, no education is given on this. It's only in the religious schools, in the madrasas, that the children are taught the importance of Salat. By the other institutions, children grow up thinking this is not an important part of life. And for a Muslim to live a life without Salat is unthinkable. This education needs the policy makers, people who are in top positions, who make policy, should keep that in mind. Unfortunately, people who sit in high positions themselves are not making salat. So, how could they stress the importance of this? This is one of the failures of the governments in Pakistan throughout its history, that they appoint people to high positions in in education and other sectors, and these are people who have no Islam in their lives. And to expect these people to be educating the future generation is is really uh, is not realistic. So the decision makers or the leaders have this grave responsibility. They will be accountable to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the day of judgment as to how they use their power. One of the tragedies in Pakistan is that the leaders have taken the focus away from the power of the Creator, from power of Allah, to the power of worldly institutions. They believe that the worldly institutions will solve the problems. The difference is that Sahaba understood, the companions of Rasulullah understood that if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is on their side, then nothing can defeat them. And that was their training. That was the training they gave to their successors. And we know from the stories of the companions how sure they were. It is said that during the time of Umar radiallahu anhu, when Islam spread to Egypt, the Egyptians had a custom that they would sacrifice a young unmarried girl for to get blessings. This was their belief of the people in the pre-Islamic people, that they had to sacrifice, throw a girl, unmarried girl, into the river to make the river flow and bring the water to the crops. So when the Muslims came to Egypt and they heard about this culture, this tradition, or this custom, they told them they will not allow that. And the Egyptians were very afraid, because they thought if they did not sacrifice a girl as they had been doing, there would be no water for the crops. The river would stop flowing and they would starve. So the governor of that time, the Muslim governor, he disallowed that, and he sent a message to Umar radiallahu anhu that this is the custom of these people, and they believe they will starve if they do not give this human sacrifice. So it is said that Umar radiallahu anhu wrote on a piece of paper addressing the river, I believe River Nile, and the note was from Amirul Mu'mineen to River Nile, and it said that if you are flowing by the order of Allah, then you keep flowing, and if you are flowing by your own will, then you can stop flowing. So the instruction was to drop this letter, to drop this note in the river. And when the note arrived in Egypt and it was dropped there, it said that the water came, started flowing even more than before. And since that time, it has been flowing. So that culture or that tradition or that foolish custom that they had was abolished. So the Sahaba had so much iman, so much faith in the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that these worldly things did not bother them. So a lot of people have superstitions that if they do this, if they do that, something catastrophic will happen. These are all from pagan customs, pagan thinking. So Islam came to demolish all these. And the way Islam teaches people is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala controls the whole creation. And if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pleased with a person's actions, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will bring conditions that will bring success. That's a very different way of thinking. The unbeliever thinks in terms of his own planning, how he's going to plan and how he's going to be successful. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the best of planners. We know from the Quran the knowledge Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave to Yusuf alayhi salam. And the king of that time, he was smart enough to appoint him in the high position where he could make decisions. And that saved the country from famine, from disaster, because of the special knowledge that Allah had given him. And that knowledge, of course, was beneficial to the humanity, people living at that time. So unfortunately, Muslims today have discarded that knowledge that comes from Allah and have substituted that with the knowledge of human beings, the knowledge of economists, the knowledge of scientists, the knowledge of everybody except Allah. Because they do not have confidence, they do not have faith in the knowledge, in the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And they come to grief every time. And they don't even realize why it's not happening the way they would like it to happen. One has to look at the history of Pakistan and see how many experts, how many foreign trained people have been imported into Pakistan to come and solve the problems of the economy and all the other issues that are facing the country, the water problem, the electric problem, and everything. And every time, each government has failed. Every government tries, but they all fail. And then they start blaming the others. But the real reason why they fail is that these people are disobedient to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And they don't even know what their problem is. They don't even diagnose the problem. They think that this problem is going to be solved the way the unbelievers solve their problems. This is not going to happen in the case of Muslims. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given the Muslims a knowledge which the others don't have. And that knowledge is not being used. And even in the courts, the system that the courts are using is not based on Islam. It is based on Western legal jurisprudence. It's based on Western ideas, Western thought. And that is not going to bring the results. Even till this day, the judges and the lawyers are still referring to judgments of the Indian Supreme Court. They're referring to the judgments of the British courts, the American courts, and there's little or no reference to the Quran or the Hadith. And if there is a reference, it is only for their own purpose. But it's a secondary source. It's not the primary source. So most times the courts are looking at foreign concepts to decide cases. And we know the mess there is in the judicial process. The same laws that the British had made over 100 years ago are still in force, as if there is no other way to go, as no other way to have a justice system. And this is a tragedy that people should think about and try to get rid of this. And the only way, of course, is through education. So it's a massive task. It's not a small task. Unless the people themselves realize that the whole system is messed up, the change is not going to come. So the change has to come through the common people. Once they understand what the issues are, then they will work in that direction. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to help us to gain that understanding and to follow in the path of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Wa akhir dawana in alhamdulillah rabbil alameen.